So, when you hear the name General Thomas Gage, I bet one thing comes to mind, right? Lexington and Concord, the guy who kicked off the American Revolution. But what about the decade before all that? We're going to look at the man who was tasked with holding a whole empire together, an empire that was already coming apart at the seams, long before anyone fired a shot.
And this question, it really gets right to the heart of the problem for Gage. Was he an Englishman first, just following orders from London no matter what? Or was he a servant of the public, with a real responsibility to the American colonists he was actually governing? For the next 12 years, he tried to be both at the same time. And, well, that's a conflict that would basically define his entire career in America.
All right, so let's set the scene. It's 1763. The 7 Years' War is finally over. Britain won big time. France is out of the picture in North America, and into this huge, sprawling new territory steps General Thomas Gage. He's the new commander-in-chief, and his job was basically to manage an entire continent.
And just look at the sheer scale of his job here. I mean, calling him a military commander doesn't even begin to cover it. He had to be a diplomat, a governor, a trade cop, even a spy master, all rolled into one. His turf stretched all the way from Quebec down to Spanish Florida and way out into the western frontier. It was this massive, continent-sized portfolio, and honestly, it was a nearly impossible job for any single person. And yeah, it did not take long for things to go sideways. Gage barely had time to unpack his bags in New York before his first huge crisis just erupted. The entire western frontier basically exploded in this wave of violence that was going to push the British Army to its absolute limit. See, for decades, the Native American tribes had been brilliant at playing the French and the British off each other. It was a delicate balancing act. But now, with the French gone, that balance was totally shattered. This sparked a huge movement that we call nativism. It was this powerful pan-tribal call to reject all European culture and, as one leader put it, drive them from our lands. The result was what we know as Pontiac's Rebellion, and it was a really brutal, coordinated war all along the frontier. Now, it's really important to get this. The Native American world wasn't just one big group. It was incredibly complex, and Gage had to figure out how to navigate it. You had the nativists on one side who were all about armed resistance, but on the other, you had powerful groups like the Iroquois Confederacy. Their strategy was accommodation. They believed that working with the British through trade and diplomacy was the smarter way to go. And Gage, he's stuck smack dab in the middle, trying to fight a war against one group while trying to keep his alliances with another. Talk about tricky. And here's something that must have driven Gage absolutely crazy. While he's trying to manage this massive war on the frontier, the very colonies he's there to protect, a lot of them just wouldn't help. Assemblies in places like Virginia and Maryland basically said, nope, not our problem, and refused to send troops. So Gage is left with his professional army stretched dangerously thin, and this is a problem that's going to come back to haunt him again and again.
Okay, so Gage has a full-blown war on the frontier. As if that wasn't enough, a second, and you could argue even bigger crisis was brewing back in the cities along the coast. See, that 7 Years' War, it was unbelievably expensive, and the government back in London decided it was about time the American colonies helped pay for it. That one decision, well, it was like throwing a match on gasoline.
Just look at this number. 130 million pounds. That was Britain's national debt. The interest alone was over 4 million pounds a year. So from London's perspective, turning to the colonies, who, let's be honest, benefited a ton from the war, and asking them to chip in, it seemed completely reasonable. It seemed fair.
Of course, the colonists did not see it that way, at all. When Parliament passed the Stamp Act in 1765, the reaction was instant, and it was violent. You started seeing posters like this pop up. This isn't a polite disagreement, it's a direct threat. The first man that either distributes or makes use of stamped paper, let him take care of his house, person, and effects. That's a threat of mob justice. And guess who was supposed to enforce this wildly unpopular law? Yep, General Gage. And just like that, Gage's job description changed overnight. He wasn't just the frontier guy anymore. Now he's moving troops around to protect tax collectors, to guard warehouses full of this hated stamped paper. He's trying to keep a lid on cities like Boston and New York that are just simmering with rage. It was an impossible balancing act. He's trying to enforce the king's law, but without accidentally starting a full-blown civil war.
So you've got about a decade of this. Crisis after crisis. Fire on the frontier. Riots in the cities. Finally, the British government decides they've had enough. They're going for a drastic solution.
They send Gage straight into the hornet's nest, Boston, with a brand new set of orders that would make him the most powerful and probably the most hated man in the colony. And this was a game changer. By 1774, Gage wasn't just the top general. He was now also the royal governor of Massachusetts. Think about that. Military power and political power all in the hands of one man. It was exactly what the colonists feared most. And his mission? It was crystal clear. Enforce those laws they called the coercive acts and basically break the will of Boston.
What's so fascinating is you can see how Gage himself had changed over this decade. This quote from a private letter he wrote back in '68, it tells you everything. His patience is just gone. The guy has showed up trying to be a diplomat and a manager. He's done with that. He's now convinced that being patient and moderate isn't working. He thinks the colonists see it as weakness. It was time, in his own words, to quash the spirit at a blow. No more messing around.
So when you think about the march to Lexington and Concord, it's so important to realize it didn't just happen out of the blue. It was really the last sad step in this 12-year-long story of one crisis after another, political screw-ups, and just simmering anger on both sides. And the whole time, General Gage was standing right in the middle of it.
And when you lay it all out like this on a timeline, it almost feels inevitable, doesn't it? From Pontiac's rebellion on the frontier, to the Stamp Act riots in the cities, to all the taxes and occupations that followed, each one of these crises just made both sides dig in their heels a little more, a little less willing to compromise. Each event was like a wedge, driving Britain and the colonies further and further apart, right up to the final break.
So if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's that the American Revolution wasn't some sudden explosion in 1775. It was more like a slow-motion train wreck, a long, painful political breakdown. And Gage? He wasn't just the guy who happened to be there when the war started. He was the man who spent a dozen years right in the eye of the hurricane, trying desperately, and in the end failing, to keep the whole thing from flying apart.
And you can literally see his attitude start to harden here. In this private letter, he's clearly had enough. He starts arguing for a massive, decisive show of force. He's basically saying, forget the cost, just let us crush this thing now, and it'll save us money in the long run. This is a long way from the pragmatic diplomat, right? This is a military man starting to believe that a military solution is the only solution. But here's the great irony. Even with an army, he was often completely powerless. Take the Stamp Act riots in New York. The local colonial government just disappeared. The governor was hiding, and Gage, the commander-in-chief of all of North America, had no legal authority to deploy his troops without an order from the civilian leaders. He literally had to go out and negotiate with mob leaders himself just to stop them from burning the city to the ground. His army was useless. Okay, so everything we've talked about so far, that was all just the prelude. By 1774, London decides to make an example out of Massachusetts, and Thomas Gage is the man they pick for the job. Boston was a powder keg, and they send Gage to stand over it with a lit match. This right here, this is the point of no return. First, they make him both military commander and political governor, all British power in one person. Talk about pressure. His mission? Enforce the super harsh coercive acts and punish Boston. But when he gets there, he realizes the situation is way, way worse than anyone in London thinks. The entire colony is organized against him, and his frantic warnings back home are pretty much falling on deaf ears. And this slide says it all. I mean, look at the disconnect. On the left, you've got his orders from London. Force should be repelled by force. Simple, confident, almost arrogant. And on the right, you've got Gage's reality. He's telling them, look, to put down this rebellion, it's not going to be a police action. It's going to be an absolute conquest, and I'm going to need at least 20,000 soldiers to do it. The gap between perception and reality was just staggering. So, acting on his orders to be decisive, Gage sends a column of troops to seize colonial weapons and gunpowder stored in Concord. And the result was the shot heard round the world. Just like that, the political crisis Gage had been trying to manage for a decade had finally, violently become a war. Gage's career in America began with him desperately trying to prevent a war. It was about to end with him getting blamed for losing one. Just 2 months later, you get the Battle of Bunker Hill. Now, technically, the British won. They took the hill. But the cost was absolutely catastrophic. This wasn't just another battle. It was a brutal, bloody wake-up call. It proved the American colonists weren't just some disorganized mob. They were a serious, lethal fighting force. And this is the number that really sealed Gage's fate: 40%. In a single afternoon of fighting at Bunker Hill, Gage lost over 1,000 of his men killed and wounded. That was up to 40% of his entire effective army in Boston. Think about that. You simply cannot sustain a war with that level of casualties. It was a victory that felt an awful lot like a defeat.
And it wasn't just hindsight. People back in London knew it right away. The famous politician Edmund Burke, he summed it up perfectly. He basically said, hey, a couple more victories like this one, and General Thomas Gage is completely finished. The price of winning was just way too high.
So yeah, the Battle of Bunker Hill. This was the moment that really set General Gage's downfall in motion. In the bloody aftermath, the commander-in-chief of all British forces in North America had to somehow explain this incredibly costly win.
I mean, Gage's own report spells out the disaster. He literally noted that this one battle had knocked out up to 40% of his effective fighting force. 40% gone in a single afternoon. You can't sustain losses like that. It's impossible.
And that's the real paradox here, isn't it? By winning the battle, General Gage had essentially lost. He lost the confidence of his bosses and started a ticking clock on the end of his command. He won the real estate, but he was about to lose his job.
After the battle, Gage didn't get a swift judgment. Oh no, what he got was much worse. He was trapped in this agonizing 4-month limbo, stuck in Boston while his authority just crumbled around him. For 4 whole months, the guy was totally isolated. He's sending these frantic messages across the Atlantic, trying to explain himself, begging for more troops, all while having absolutely no idea what the bigwigs 3,000 miles away in London were deciding about his future.
His letters from this time are just fascinating. You can practically feel his confidence evaporating. He knew his army was trapped, that they couldn't break out, and he even starts referring to the new American commander, George Washington, with this kind of grudging respect, calling him Mr. Washington.
And this is where the story gets really dramatic. Because while Gage is stuck in Boston, waiting for ships that might never come, his career is being systematically taken apart in the halls of power back in London. The knives were out.
Okay, so let's jump back to London. The horrific news from Bunker Hill had landed like a bombshell. And well, the government needed someone to blame. And guess where the finger pointed? Straight at General Gage.
And now we meet the main villain of our story, Lord George Germain. And get this. This wasn't just about politics, it was personal. The source material says Germain had a serious dislike for Gage ever since they were schoolboys, and now he saw his chance to settle an old score and take his rival down.
And the attacks weren't just coming from powerful politicians. Gage's authority had totally collapsed from within his own ranks. His troops, beaten down and demoralized after Bunker Hill, had given him a nickname, and it was brutal. Tommy the Old Woman. Wow. When your own soldiers are calling you that, it's over.
So when you add it all up, the forces against him were just overwhelming. You've got powerful political enemies, his own troops have lost faith, the public is horrified by the casualty numbers, and the government desperately needs a fall guy. General Gage never really stood a chance. And so it was done. The order was signed. A ship set sail for Boston, carrying the official end of Thomas Gage's command in America. He was being called home, not for a pat on the back, but in total disgrace.
So after all that, after he's recalled, how has history looked back on General Gage? Was he really just incompetent, or is there more to the story?
Well, for a long time, the verdict was pretty harsh. The Oxford Dictionary of National Biography kind of sums up that classic view, calling him a good soldier but no warrior. Basically, the idea was that he was a decent administrator, a good bureaucrat who was just completely out of his league when a real war started.
But, historians are always looking at things again. And now a more modern take is emerging. Instead of just writing him off as a failure, some historians see Gage as a product of his entire system, the massive British fiscal military state. This was a system all about logistics, taxes, and trade to fund wars. Gage was a master of that system, who was suddenly thrown into a revolution he was just not equipped to understand. Which really leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? Was General Thomas Gage just an incompetent leader who botched the beginning of the war? Was he a convenient scapegoat for a crisis that was way bigger than any one person? Or was he just the wrong man, in the wrong place, at the exact moment history decided to turn everything upside down?